So the hypothesis could be best tested by which of the following experiments? So the hypothesis is that people become unresponsive to certain familiar foods because they think about what they think they know what it's going to be, and the brain is expecting a certain thing, and so they taste that rather than what it actually is. So in order to test this hypothesis, really, again, I'm not looking at the answers. You can't see it, but I have my hand over the answer choices, even for no reason. Anyway, we would predict that in order to test this, you would need to feed some people something that isn't what it looks like. So let's look for that in the answer choices. A, finding the neurological pathways by which familiar flavors are processed. Well, finding those pathways, I don't know, it might be helpful, but that wouldn't really test anything. B, finding whether familiar sweet flavors are perceived in the same way as familiar salty flavors. Well, this is comparing familiar to familiar. The problem is familiar flavors when something unfamiliar is actually being eaten. C, finding whether different people lose response to familiar flavors at the same rate. Different rates for different people is not really the question. D, finding whether people experience familiar foods in the same ways that they experience unfamiliar foods. Again, these are kind of keeping the familiar side to the familiar and the unfamiliar to the unfamiliar. What this passage is about is when people think the food is one thing and it actually is something else. So that leaves us with E, which must be it, but let's look at it. Finding whether replacing familiar foods with identical looking but different tasting decoy foods had an effect on how the tasters perceive them. So this is exactly what we predicted, a mix of unfamiliar and familiar in choice E.